Hey guys, Dylan from the Geek Duo here, and today I'll be bringing you my Hero Academia Chapter 294 read-through. Now, before we get started, I've got to explain the obvious. I now have a pop shield in front of my microphone, and the attempts to hopefully relieve some of the P sounds and the S hissing from actually coming out in the video to make it more bearable for you, the listener or watcher, to watch these videos. Now, before we get started, I just want to say that this chapter was nothing like what I was expecting it to be. There is no way that I could have predicted what happens in this chapter. And that's a good thing, because it's a very interesting chapter. So the chapter begins with a run through of all the characters that have, all the important characters that have been injured. We see a panel of Crossed, who we know is dead, and he's the only one with a black background to sort of signify that he's in a different state to everyone else that is being shown. At least on this first page. We see Aizawa on a stretcher with a medical team around him. We see Mirko on a stretcher, bandaged up, and she's got a respirator on her face. We see a panel of Manuel and Rocklock. They're the only ones that really haven't been injured throughout this entire thing. We see Gran Torino with a respirator and bandaged up. We see Ryukyu being carried off by the medical team. We see Present Mike without his glasses. I'm not sure if he had them the last time we saw him, but he's also not been injured throughout this. And we get a close-up of Hawks' face. Now this continues on to the second page, so I'm going to point out the five that we see here, and then read through the text throughout the entire 2 pages, because we see Mount Lady lying on her face next to some crushed trees, and if you actually look at the picture closely, she has branches and that actually sticking out of her in several places. Like, you've got at least 3 in her left arm, you've got several sticking out of her lower back and butt area, and she doesn't look to be in that good of a situation. Hence why I said that of the first page only one had died. We don't know her status. We also don't know the status of the next person it shows, because we see Midnight lying in a very similar position, and her face mask is strewn several feet away, and none of the people that were attacking her or were about to attack her are anywhere nearby. We see Endeavor now lying on the ground, unable to move. We see, and passed out by the looks of it. And we see Midoriya falling from the sky. He wasn't in the sky the last time we saw it, so I'm not sure. Maybe he's being blown back by what Darby did to him in the last chapter. And the last one we see is Best Genus, who is still struggling with his bindings and coughing up blood. Or it's coming from his nose. I think it's coming from his nose, like how you see telepaths. When they use their power too much, their nose starts bleeding. I think that's what's happening with Best Jeanist here. Anyway, Best Jeanist says, the anesthetic is beginning to show effect. This is undoubtedly not just some coincidence. So many people, one after the other, all wore down this powerful beast just enough for the drug to kick in. I have faith. A single strand may be thin, but banded together they are form a mighty rope. Had even one strand been flimsy, then none of this would have been possible. I have faith. And we see that behind him, the 4 high-end Nomu that are there are still fighting. We see Gigantomachia has finally hit the ground with a massive bam, and we see a flash of Darby and Shoto in the air behind Machia in an inferno. We see that Machia, his eyes are closed now, and behind Darby, some of Best Jeanist's metal fibers are stretching their way towards him, while Shoto is keeping him busy from the front. And Best Jeanist thinks, just a bit more. Suddenly, the biggest high-end Nomu, the one with the bone plates on his shoulders and his arms, he tries to attack Best Jeanist, only to be intercepted by Mirio, phasing through the arm that was going to hit Best Jeanist and countering with a punch to the top of the head, which sends this Nomu back massively. And that was with the Nomu somehow blocking at least some of the impact from what seems to be Mirio's punch. The second punch seems to have been blocked by his other arm. Mirio says, this guy might be a problem for the heroes over there. His movements are simple, but his speed and tenacity are no joke. Each one of these guys is probably as strong as the Nomu from Kyushu. You can't just take them down easily. He just says, Great Explosion Motor God Dynamite, which is apparently more close to what his name actually is. Like, you're no match for them when your body can't even take a tumble. And Bakugo, he tries to respond, but all he can do is make a weird hit sound. And you think, damn it, I can't even manage to say anything back. Whatever, just make sure that these villains stay away from Best Jeanist. We then see a panel of Best Jeanist thinking, my focus had been used to subdue the giant. Can finally stretch out towards the other league members. And then it cuts to a close-up of this chapter's main... Well, technically he's the protagonist of this chapter, but he's the main villain that gets a feature this chapter. He thinks, these restraints are so tight, I can't touch the cables. I can't use my compressor without touching the object. In this situation, the only thing I can grab is my own butt. And Shigaraki's just a limp noodle. Weren't you the one who called us all together? You gathered us and told us to go wild, remember? You're suffering now. What am I to do? We're completely trapped. It's just as Spinner says. No one here, not Darby, not Toga-chan, nor even I, have yet achieved our dreams. he probably would have gone on with a much bigger internal monologue had it not been for the fact that at this exact moment Best Jeanist sent a couple more cables towards Mr. Compress and Spinner and begins choking them. And Mr. Compress, he figures out a way around this. He says, Spinner, I really love the League. The boss is the key. On the count of 5, wake up the boss. And he's also thinking to himself at the same time, no matter who it was, one's past never came into question. We were just a group of deviants. This was quite the unruly bunch. Match the timing with the Nomu's positions to give ourselves some distance. I'll need some volunteers for this next act. My dream, my calling, the reason I'm here. As he's thinking this, he touches his ass, like he said was the only thing he could touch, and he takes a chunk of his hip region and turns it into a marble. And suddenly he's got enough room now to move his arm to touch the cables. I'll take a piece out of my own body to give my arm room to move. And when I can move my arm, he slashes that arm across, tapping both Spinner and Shigaraki and turning them into marbles, which he catches easily. Looks like it's my turn for a badass moment. Right, let's make this my greatest escape. Mirio, he notices that the League are now free, while he seems to have a fist going through the head of a Nomu, and as he's looking, he sees Mr. Compress bouncing up the spines on Gigantomachi's back. Now, Best Jeanist obviously also notices this, and he's like, he shaved a part of his own body. However, that injury is fatal. You can't run forever. The reason I paused before saying that is because this is the 3rd chapter in a row where the translators have changed what it actually says and put the actual thing in the translated notes. Because what it says in the actual panel is, he's hauling his own ass. I had to say it in that tone because that's basically the tone I read it in. Closing detainment. But even if he tries to restrain me, as long as my hand is free, I can break free before that happens. And we see that there are several parts of Mr. Compress that are being turned into marbles as Best Jeanist is trying to constrict the fibers around them. We also see him running past a trapped skeptic who actually never got to leave Gigantomachi's back. He's like, hey, you're freeing, aren't you? Then get me out of here and save me too. And so Mr. Compress, he taps the fibers, turning a portion of them into a marble, and says, escape and deception are my only strength, so I'll save the team from this crisis. Oji Haruma, the peerless thief, a burglar from a long time ago. At the dawn of the current system we know, he targeted the greedy heroes who filled their bellies and redistributed their wealth to the people with rectification. So basically he was the My Hero Academia Robin Hood, except rather than the rich lords of the area, it's the selfish heroes. I wonder if he's in part inspiration for Stain and his ideals. Atsuhiro, this is our lineage, to shine a light on corruption. That is the justice in the blood that flows through you. So, Mr. Compress is directly related to the peerless thief Oji Harama, who first got mentioned way back during the school festival arc in Gentle Criminal's video, where he lists Oji Harama, Destro, and All for One. We obviously know All for One. We know Destro's son, Read Destro, and now we know Oji Harama's relation in Mr. Compress. I'm just going to say right now, he's actually Oji Harama's great-grandson. So, you've got the great-grandson of one of the biggest villains. You've got the son of another of the biggest villains. You've got the successor to the third biggest villain from Gentle Criminal's videos. And they're all working together now. And you've also got the son of the number one hero. You've got the grandson of the mentor to the previous number one hero. And yeah, there's some strong bloodlines in the Paranormal Liberation Front. Anyway, we get a brief cut to the Darby and Shoto fight, where Darby's just like, "Sorry Shoto, the situation's changed. I can't break Enji's little puppet while he's passed out. Sorry, Masterpiece." And he actually uses another one of Endeavor's moves, and he's just to blast Shoto back. It's the Flash Fire Fist, Jet Burn, because he seems to use it to push Shoto back and also launch himself backwards onto the top of Markia to meet up with Mr. Compress, who's still thinking about his family. "Harima, the rectification that you couldn't bring to fruition will be left in the hands of my boss now. Shigaraki, leader of the PLF and the League of Villains. You'll change the world in my place." And while he's singing this, he says out loud to the people watching, "I am the great elusive Harima's great-great-grandson. I only had one great earlier, I was incorrect. The man with the blood of the King of Thieves. You thought I was just another background character. That was just another one of my tricks. And the secret behind it is, well, I guess you can say a secret, because the magician never reveals his tricks." And we see that Mr. Compress, he's not actually being turned into marbles, except for the chunk that was taken out initially. He was only tapping his clothing, turning that into marble, which means that he can actually control the layer at which his quirk activates, which something we didn't know about it till now. It makes him a much more interesting power. He finishes this off with, "Escape Master Mr. Compress." He tosses the two marbles with Spinner and Shigaraki into them to the ground, and he says, "A once-in-a-lifetime show," which is probably how this chapter got its name, because, well, Best Jeanist says that the wound that Mr. Compress gave himself would be fatal, and this chapter is titled Last Stage, which means it's probably the closing act of Mr. Compress's showmanship business. This was a great chapter for a completely different reason than I was expecting, like I mentioned earlier, because it just means that there's one member of the League of Villains whose backstory we don't know. because we got Twice's backstory, we got Toga's backstory, and we got Shigaraki's backstory, all during the My Villain Academia arc. We've now got Darby's partial backstory. I mean, we've got partial backstories for the other three, so we've got Darby's backstory, and, well, not so much Mr. Compressor's backstory. We do have his lineage, and the badass moment that was given to the other four. Now we just need Spinner, who we know joined the League because he was inspired by Stain. He wants to bring forth Stain's will, and is probably the closest to Stain out of all of his acolytes, because you've got Darby, who, as much as he wants to be, he's not. You've got Mr. Compress, who we don't even know how he sees himself related to Stain. I mean, unless of course it is that Stain was inspired by Oji Haruma, so then basically he's saying, well, this guy was inspired by my great-great-grandfather. I might as well say I'm joining because of him, and not because of the person he was inspired by. We don't know how Twice came into League. He was brought in by Girin, we know that, but it seems it might have been completely unrelated to Stain. But yeah, now we just need Spinner's backstory, and then we've got the whole League. I mean, technically we still do need Mr. Compressor's backstory. I'm doing a lot of well technicallys in this video. I like how at the start we did get the brief snapshots of all of the injured heroes, because, well, for at least the first page it means that they survived, with Aizawa getting his medical treatment, Miyako getting her medical treatment, Gran Torino getting his medical treatment, Hawks, we've seen him before, he's still bandaged up and unconscious, and Yukio being seen by the medical physicians. The second page is not so happy in the ones that it shows, because Mount Lady could very well be dead in the forest, Midnight could very well be dead in the forest, and Deva's well overheated. He's mentioned he's burned his lungs through and he's currently unconscious. Midoriya is completely mangled and his black whip tongue got burnt, and Best Jeanist is now bleeding profusely from either his nose or he's coughing it up. Also, Shoto appears to be unconscious now as well from the blast from Darby. But at least Gigantomachia is unconscious. Yeah. Even with the heroes that are still remaining, I don't see how they can really pull this off if it wasn't for the fact that the League seems to be pulling a retreat. Also, I didn't make mention of this before because, well, I want to actually have its own separate portion of the video, but this page right here is the page where Best Jeanist decides to try and choke out Spinner and Mr. Compress, and yeah, I just want to make mention of Spinner's faces throughout this video. Well, not this video, throughout this page. Especially middle bottom. But there's not really much to break down in this chapter, so... It was also a fun chapter because Mr. Compress is a fun persona to get into. I also liked Mirio. I realized that I did give them seemingly similar voices. But yeah. Well, my voices aren't the same from video to video, so that doesn't really matter. Because I definitely changed what I gave Skeptic as a voice. Definitely did a different voice for Darby. This Mr. Compressed voice wasn't the same Mr. Compressed voice from a couple chapters ago. Nor was... I think Best Janus was somewhat similar. Either I don't think I've spoken in his voice before. That's just very stiff and like blunt, so I don't really have to worry about getting too much into character. But yeah, I'm very excited for what comes next. Hopefully Mr. Compressed, they find a way to like keep him alive, because the very last thing we see of him is him standing there with the hand holding the marble over his head, in which he then swings down to smash, his mechanical arm covering his nips, the massive hole in the side of his body, and he's also seemingly naked, which makes me wonder why he's got his arm across his torso and not covering his junk. But hey, you do you, my guy. But yeah, hopefully they can do something like what they did with his arm and give him a mechanical patch to keep that together. They really need a healer on their side, like desperately. Also, the last image is a close-up of Shigaraki's face, so that does not bode well. It may be time for him to wake up a little bit. Either get them the fuck out of there, or pull off some last-minute move that wins them the war. Anyway, this was an enjoyable chapter. Wasn't much new, well, it was entirely new information, but there wasn't much new shown. So with that being said, if you enjoyed the video and want to catch more of these, no, I'm not going to tell you to subscribe. I don't like telling people to subscribe in these videos. Only in my Twitch videos do I do that. Okay, well, if you have any tips on how to make these better, either try and keep the same voices, like keep track of the same voices, because I try and do the same voices, but I'm not that good at remembering, so I'd have to actually go back and watch the other ones before doing this. But also there's the fact that my voice sounds different when I'm saying it versus when I'm hearing it, so yeah, I'll find a way to make them better. If you guys want that, then comment down below saying you do. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.